Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yahowah Radio. I'm here with Kirk and Dee, and I'm reading a post in the chat room here, and it sounds like one of the programs that we did last week was banned from YouTube for salty language. Can you imagine? Now, I did, 10 years of syndicated radio, 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, and there are the 10 or so words that you're never supposed to say on the radio. Now, if you actually research them, there actually is no rule. They're just the guidelines, and there's certain things they prefer you not say. And then there's some words that you just shouldn't say no matter what, because it's not an effective way to communicate. So I'm reasonably disciplined in terms of not using any of the words that would get you in trouble in terms of terrestrial radio. But one of the reasons that people have moved, well, there's lots of reasons, to podcasts and blogs, is because there are no rules. There are no governing bodies that say what you can and cannot say. So to be banned for salty language is, it tells you that the thought police have gone way too far. But beyond that, I think the only things that we said, and it was, I'm sure it's my fault, I don't think it's Dee or Kirk, is that I was questioning people's intelligence for some of the moronic positions that they had embraced. For example, Israel is lighting up again in very disruptive protests. The progressives are going into restaurants and harassing diners. They tried to block entrance into the Knesset so that people couldn't vote. They are targeting the homes of those politicians that they do not like. All the while, they're screaming that down with dictators and that they are pro-democracy, while the elected parliament in Israel, called the Knesset, is trying to actually exercise democracy because, well, they greatly outpolled the liberals on the last election cycle, and the one thing that those who are elected are trying to do is rein in a completely uncontrolled dictatorship as it relates to the judiciary, where the judiciary appoints their own. There is no recall mechanism, unlike other democracies, if you will. It's not elected officials who choose the judges, but other judges who choose the judges. And they do not have a constitution or a Bill of Rights. So unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, that can only rule on the U.S. Constitution and on its Bill of Rights, they have what they call a reasonableness clause, where they can strike down any piece of legislation because, in their opinion, it's not reasonable. I was going to say moronic, but that might be salty language. Why don't we say it's silly that a group of people would take to the streets and protest against elected officials claiming that they're pro-democracy by supporting an institution that is assaulting the decisions of those who were elected. But nonetheless, that's what we find ourselves in Israel, and it's a very, very sad state of affairs. The country is torn apart at the seams. About a couple of weeks ago, how U.S. Supreme Court justices were not being particularly moral in their use of gratuities and trips and money-making schemes and the like. And the person who was attacked the most is the most conservative judge, happens to be a black judge. And he's Clarence Thomas, and he's the one that's most attacked because he has taken vacations with somebody who he's actually never rendered a decision on, so it can't be bribery. But nonetheless, he's taken vacations, lots of them. And they don't want to criticize Ruth Ginsburg, who actually took more than he did. And this week it was reported that another liberal, Sotomayor's staff, has admitted that she has made almost $4 million since she's become a Supreme Court justice, peddling her books.
Wow.
Their books are nothing but thinly disguised excuses to capitalize on her name recognition. But because she is liberal, we don't have anybody criticizing her in the media. One of the things that delights me, and I probably shouldn't, but the fact of the matter is, I do not care much for conspiracies nor right-wing or left-wing political wackos. And Mike Lindell is one of those people that I would list as king of the political wackos. And he is the worst kind because he is also a religious wacko. He's always got crosses on his as a necklace and on his lapel. And I think, if I'm not right, I think he was has had a tremendous drug problem. I think it was even cocaine in the past. So he's got a very immoral past. But he created a company called My Pillow, and he marketed that company under the image of the dead God on a stick, the Christian cross. And then he got to be really tight with Mr. I'm completely out of my mind, Donald Trump, and began to run with all the conspiracy theories on the voting machines and this sort of thing. Well, he's in the news now because My Pillow is falling apart. It's lost its stuffing. Walmart dropped them, and because he has so much negative publicity from his own tripping on his tongue, he can't give pillows away. So he's doing a barn sale on all of his equipment, and of course he's complaining they did cancel culture on us. So a guy that makes pillows is claiming that he's being put out of business because of cancel culture. I guess if there's a guy that's going to go out of business, he'd be high on my list. Maybe the guy from Hobby Lobby can join him, and then maybe what's the chicken place? Not Raising Cane, but
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A. Yeah, that's another one that the guy runs his company with his religion on his sleeve. Recently, we've seen a very odd sense of behavior from Turkey. Turkey had promised that they would keep the Ukrainian military leaders that had been captured by Russia in prison until the war was over, and yet they released them to the Ukraine in direct conflict with what they had promised Russia. They had been opposed to Sweden's admission into NATO, and then all of a sudden did an about-face. When you see this kind of thing from a guy that is as duplicitous as is the Erdogan in Turkey, you always say, okay, there was a bribe here someplace. And of course, what he wants is admission into the EU, and the EU doesn't want any part of him because, well, the economy is a shambles, and it would tear down the value of the euro. So I said, all right, since he's not getting his EU membership, which is what he asked for in return for supporting the additional NATO membership, then it's the United States has agreed to give him lots of weapons. And lo and behold, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin discussed the increased support for Turkey's military modernization during his call with Turkey's counterpart in direct relation to allowing Sweden's NATO approval. Nothing says peace like giving a Muslim country lots of new weapons for them to approve NATO membership. Leah showed me a video earlier today, and it was of a discussion with a group of historians and economic advisors for world leaders, and they were talking about the Ukraine. And what they were saying was that this idea that Putin is the aggressor, which is accepted by 99.99% of Westerners in Europe and in the Americas, people who are just easily misled, he says is ultimately utter nonsense. He says the decision to arm Ukraine and make them part of NATO, along with Georgia and all of the nations on Russia's border, so that Russia would be blocked from the Black Sea and Russia would be bordered by nations armed with NATO weapons surrounding it, was not made in 2006, which is what I have spoken of on this show when it was announced by George W. Bush that his intent and America's intent was to make NATO part of, or make Ukraine part of NATO. But it became central to America's foreign policy back in 2002. And that there are numerous published papers by insiders and political and international advisors to the most elite of our politicians, going all the way back to 2002 on NATO's inclusion into, and not only NATO, but every other country surrounding Russia, cutting Russia off and ultimately being able to defeat Russia through this strangulation and surrounding her so that she would have to engage in war and having Europe and the United States defeat her that way. So the United States plotted this war in Ukraine all the way back to 2002. At the time, Putin wasn't in power. At the time, it was Gorbachev who was in power, and the United States made solemn promises to Gorbachev at the time that the Soviet Union was breaking up, that it would never, under any circumstances, include those nations that wanted independence from the old USSR into NATO. And all the while we're having those discussions, we're publishing internal papers saying that our intent was to do just the opposite. So let me tell you, the war in Ukraine was planned by the United States 20 years before it occurred. The United States is the belligerent. We caused it knowingly and purposefully. And there are admissions all the way through from 2002 to 2006 to throughout the administrations and throughout senatorial leaders and the U.S. military affirming that this is the war we wanted. And this week, Biden, when he woke up from his nap at one of the summits, said that Russia can't continue to fight in the Ukraine forever, as if America wants a forever war. It is indeed disgusting. And the strategy for the United States was that this country that represents 4% of the world's population wants to be the unchallenged superpower across the globe, with no exceptions. And so destroying Russia and weakening China was our strategy so that the United States was a uncontested superpower. There was a number of Islamic nations that had tizzy fits over the burning of the Quran in Sweden. And they said, we're just not going to, we're going to go and attack the Swedish embassy, this, that, and the other thing. Do you think it was a natural-born Swede that burned the Quran?
Probably not.
Nope, he was an Iraqi. He was an Iraqi who claimed that he needed refugee status. Sweden was stupid enough to give it to him. He was an Iraqi that served, he's got pictures of him, in a number of Iraqi armed militias. He is not a Swede, does not represent them. And my view is that to be provocative in this way, to stand out in front of a mosque and to burn a book like a Quran is utterly stupid. Now, I'm going to tell you that the Quran is the dumbest book ever written. Hopefully that's not too salty as language, but I have proof. That's not my opinion. It is a considered conclusion. In fact, it would be impossible to argue against that conclusion if you were aware of the information contained in Prophet of Doom, which is a 1,000-page analysis of the Quran put into chronological order, into the context of Muhammad's life, using the oldest hadith. And so what I've encouraged people to do is to capitalize on what I have done. Read the Quran in chronological order in the context of Muhammad's life so that it can be very easily understood, and you will come to the same conclusion. Muhammad was amongst the worst people who ever lived. He was a misogynist. He was a rapist. He was a pedophile. He was a mass murderer. He was a thief. He was an avowed liar. He claimed to be and was demon-possessed. He was a ruthless terrorist. And the Quran is the best the Quran has to offer is incredibly inconsistent and unintelligent plagiarism. And at its worst, it is a terrorist manifesto. Books like that ought to be understood, because if you understand the Quran, you understand why some 99% of the world's most ruthless terrorist acts are perpetrated by fundamentalist Muslims. As we continue to try to isolate Russia through our proxy war via Ukraine, and of course the most recent advent in that war is the United States supplying Ukraine with cluster bombs, which is savagely inhuman. The Ukraine pledged they wouldn't use them in Russia. Great, they're going to use them on Ukrainians. Isn't that swell? What it has done, along with our belligerence towards China, is pushed China and Russia together, and this week China Z pledged to work with Russia to develop a variety of strategic partnerships. You really have to be careful when you're trying to demonize people. We talked last week about demonizing the Saudi Arabian government over Khashoggi's death. And it is the perfect example of people taking things out of context and deciding that it is appropriate to stand on our high horse and say, well, we're not going to be involved in anything dealing with Saudi Arabia because they killed Khashoggi. And yet you will fly the flag and celebrate the 4th of July and speak of America as if we're peaceful and altruistic, when there are tens of thousands of civilians that America has murdered without due process, raining fire from the skies with our drones. And so it is incredibly hypocritical for us to condemn a nation for killing one person when we've killed tens of thousands without due process. Not a single one of those that we've killed is guilty of killing an American. Not a single one of them was guilty of our processed in a trial, had a tribunal, had any opportunity for justice. President of the United States says, yeah, kill them, and we send drones to surgically kill them and anybody around them. We spoke at length about the march on Moscow, which the media wants to portray as an attempted mutiny. by what they say is mercenary chief Prigozhin. And everything the United States media has reported turned out to be wrong. As a matter of fact, Prigozhin's whereabouts aren't unknown. Almost immediately after his trip to to Moscow, guess where he ended up?
Where?
In Moscow. When everybody said, he turned around and went back, and he went to Belarus, and they have this agreement, they're not going to prosecute him, and everybody's cool, let bygones be bygones. No. I think it was 24 hours. He was not only in Moscow, but all of his lead generals were in Moscow, and they spent 4 hours face-to-face with Putin and Putin's military leaders. Now, do you think anybody in the U.S. intelligence community reported that? Of course not.
No, not reported.
But that's what they did. They had a kumbaya little chat there and decided what they were going to do, and everybody parted company. But this idea that his whereabouts are unknown, no. He was in Moscow. There is a priest. You know how in every parish in Louisiana is named one way or another associated with the Roman Catholic Church. That's why they call them parishes. Well, there's a priest, Catholic priest, of course, in Louisiana. He has been sentenced to 25 years in prison after he pled guilty to drugging and molesting 17 men that he met as they were tourists in New Orleans. He would drug them, and then once he drugged them, he would have sex with them. Another shining example of what it means to be a Roman Catholic. One of the things that was most amazing last week was the operation the IDF conducted in Jenin. And it was interesting for a number of reasons. One is I listened to the media speak of Jenin being a refugee camp. There's not a tent in the place. It's a full developed city with all concrete and stone buildings and paved streets. This is not a refugee camp. It's a city. Second, everybody wanted to say that it was occupied. Well, if it's occupied, why did the IDF have to go in? And why did the IDF leave and it's still called occupied? If it was occupied, the IDF would be there. But no. The New York Times says, the major operation where the Israeli military, the IDF, invaded occupied Jenin and then withdrew. Well, if they withdrew, it's not occupied. If they had to go in on an incursion, it wasn't occupied. What in the world are you talking about? Can't anybody get anything right? And, of course, the UN then chimes in and says it violated international law. So,
really?
Yeah. Of course, it was one of, in fact, a number of international generals from various countries around the world called it an absolute textbook case as a perfect military operation in a civilian community, because not a single person was injured or killed that wasn't a belligerent holding a gun trying to kill Israelis. The biggest crime is that, the United States through Oslo forced Israel to withdraw from the occupied areas so that the Palestinian Authority could occupy them. And so back 30 years ago, Israel withdrew. And the Palestinian Authority hasn't had an election in 20 years. They have no credibility. They're hated. I think it's like 80% of the Fakistanians despise them. And so Iran has created the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and now there's also the Lion's Den. And Hamas has taken a very, very aggressive presence within these areas that the Palestinian Authority has essentially withdrawn from. And so since there is no policing there, there's nothing to confront terrorism, and since the Palestinian Authority has indoctrinated everyone for years not only to hate Israel, but to realize that fame and fortune and a badge of honor and monies forever flow for those Palestinians who kill Jews, the Palestinian Authority has manufactured terrorists, has no influence or control over them, and Iran, through Hamas and Islamic Jihad, is funding them. And yet, when Israel goes in and tries to thwart the importation and use of weapons, they're called the bad guys. Violation of international law. The United Nations, what little credibility it may once have had, is completely gone. So that's the review of the news. Things are getting very dark. They're getting very dark very quickly. And so if you don't want to be swept up in it, the answer is Yahweh, his Torah, his prophets, and particularly his son, who serves us and his father beyond anything that anyone has ever done in human history. That would be Dowd to David. He is the Son of God. He is the Messiah. He is the King of Kings. And he is the Zeroah, which is the sacrificial lamb who fulfilled Passover. So what we're going to do today is, I said at the end of our program last week, that we would begin the first summation review of the 89th Mizmor. We've made it about a third of the way through the Mizmor, the Psalm, and so we've reached a place of review, and we're going to start there, read through this, and add a few comments along the way before we press on. It begins, a poem of insights to contemplate and comprehend by being circumspect and thoughtful, Meskel, through Eythan, whose name means the constant and eternal, productive and established, profuse and enduring, Ezrachy, beloved, native-born, strong arm, who is cherished. This is the introductions. Ezrachy is, and this is Eythan Ezrachy, is mentioned a couple of times in the prophets and in the writings, and he was acclaimed to be the wisest man in Solomon's inner circle. And he grew up while Dowd was king, and then transitioned to his son's court. So he is somebody that was considered the wisest man at the time that the wisest man was considered to be Solomon. And he is somebody who knew Dowd exceedingly well. And he is now serving as a prophet. So one of the things I notice is even as the edit team goes over these books, and and I say there's 40 prophets, and they say, "Are you sure there's 40?" Because we've taken out Job, for example, was not a prophet. We've taken out Ezekiel, was not a prophet. Daniel was not a prophet, and it on and on it goes. There are a lot of false books that were written. The Maccabees, that they were not prophets, and so still, how could it be 40? So one of the things that is often missed is that while Eythan is never called a prophet, this is one of the most remarkable prophetic books ever written. So he is serving as a prophet of Yahweh. Every test that you would apply to the 89th Mizmor affirms that he was a prophet. And there are many, many people throughout the Towrah and Prophets who Yahweh specifically calls prophets. They just don't have books attributed to them. And when you go through all of them, that's an interesting thing. There happen to be 40 of them. And it's 40 even after you weed out the people who were not prophets. So this is a remarkable man. That's who is the scribe of this. But for most of this, it is Yahweh speaking in first person. But Yahweh is not dictatorial.
Right.
Yahweh's approach to the people he speaks through is that while the majority of the message comes directly from him, he encourages and includes the insights, response, attitude, conclusions of those with whom he is communicating. And that is true here. So there are statements where Eythan is saying, I want you to know this. This guy was flat out amazing. And Yahweh's relationship with him was amazing. And I love this guy, and I love Yahweh. So there are exclamations from him, just as the entirety of Devarim in the Torah are speeches made by Moshe, but they're speeches made by Moshe on the subjects that Yahweh communicated to him. So that is a significant part of what we're reading.
Mm-hmm.
He goes on to say, I want to sing, Mizmor, of course, is a song, I want to sing the eternal and everlasting love, the steadfast devotion and the enduring favoritism, the unfailing affection and genuine mercy, kindness, and generosity forevermore of Yahweh. On behalf of all generations throughout time, the household, family, and home. We don't have enough people singing about Dowd. There aren't enough people singing Yahweh's praises either. There aren't even enough people singing about what's important for us to understand about Yahweh's intent with Yisra'el. And so God, by this, is encouraging us to sing along. There is no greater Mizmor psalm than the 89th. There are very few chapters in any of the prophetic books that could match the 89th in terms of prophetic importance and sheer brilliance.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great.
this is the guy that begins by saying, I want to sing. We should all want to sing about this same message. And the first thing he says is, Yahweh is loving, and his love endures forever. That he is devoted and steadfast in that devotion. That he plays favorites, which is one of the things I love about God. I think anybody that doesn't play favorites is not being honest and really isn't sincere. We all have favorites. I mean, we choose who we want to spend our time with and whom we don't. We choose who we want to have conversations with, who we want to give things to, who we want to meet. We all play favorites. And playing favorites doesn't make you a racist, doesn't make you a bigot. It makes you informed, moral, conscientious, truthful. We all have our favorites. And, for example, I'm very uncomfortable around Muslims. I'm very uncomfortable about the Haredim, overtly religious Jews. I'm very uncomfortable about overtly politicized Christians.
Yeah.
Roman Catholics who buy into the myths of that church's inerrancy give me the creeps. I don't like to be in the company of progressives because I find them to be thoughtless. So there's lots of things that I think it's important for us to realize that if we are genuine, we're going to say, I don't like that versus I like somebody else. I've all but adopted a young man on this island and have poured countless hours and energy into helping him prevail in what I thought was a dirty trick by a group of cops and bad behavior on behalf of a judge. And I figured out how to get him a quality attorney, paid for that. And I then came up with a strategy that would offset the bias towards the cops and that would eventually put the judge in a position where you have to do the right thing. And then at this now, on behalf of this young man who would have lost 30 years of his life if we did not prevail, and it was announced yesterday that we won. I mean,
wow.
Completely exonerated and with prejudice, which means you can't even go back to this thing again, and complete exoneration. Wow. And so I did this because I genuinely care for this young man. And I thought he got a rotten deal. So I played a favorite. I can't rescue everybody, nor can any of us, unless you're Dowd, of course. But I could take this young man and reach out and help him, give him a second chance at life. But even in this regard, in terms of playing favorites, this victory isn't the end. It's just the beginning. You know, every day I mentor this young man. Leah and I took him to dinner tonight to celebrate what we had achieved together and just to enjoy the relationship. Yahweh is that way. He finds people he likes. You know, Dowd is an acquired taste. I mean, Dowd is an amazing character, but not everyone's going to like him. You know, first, people that are that courageous, that confident, that bold, that articulate causes people to be jealous. So there's a lot of people that are going to look at him as, you know, he's conceited or this, that, and the other thing, because they're just going to feel jealousy around him. Yahweh loved him. Loved him. And so God plays favorites. This is affirming that he plays favorites, and he should. It's a right thing to do. He does not pretend to love everybody. He chooses who he wishes to love. He has unfailing affection for those who he chooses to favor. And what that means is that we can look at someone like Abraham and we can say, you know, God says that he loves this man. And I'm going to tell you, Abraham is just flat out not lovable. I mean, the things that he did are disgusting. First, he's not very smart. And that bothers me. I prefer people that are thoughtful and smart. He's not. Pimped out his wife numerous times for profit. That really irritates me. Really showed no appreciation for the things that Yahweh did for him. I'm not even sure he had great understanding of them. And so you say, what's lovable about this guy? You look at Jacob's life, and you say, what's lovable about his life? Most every decision that he made was wrong. And yet there is something in these personalities that God says, I like them. And part of it is that God is blinded to the things that he's sharing with us that are irritating. Because he envelops these people in his garment of light. So what he sees is perfection. And so everything that they do that is positive in their interactions with him is celebrated, and all the dunderhead things he completely ignores. But he ignores it in terms of the way that he looks at them, but not the way he presents them to us. And this is one of the most interesting parts of God's story. he presents everybody in his story, warts and all of Dowd's mistakes and judgment, emotional mistakes, he shares with us. When Moshe made a mistake, he shares it with us.
Right.
And yet, he doesn't see those mistakes in these people. The reason he shares them with us is so that we're not intimidated. And Dowd would be unbelievably intimidating. He's so bright. He's so courageous, so passionate. His body of work on behalf of Yahweh is so immense. And then the guy says, I'm going to serve as the Passover lamb, and I know what that means. That means the most ruthless empire in the history of humanity is going to crucify me, and that's only after they whip me to the point that I'm almost dead. And that's the easy part, because the next day I'm going to go into hell, and I'm going to carry the guilt of every covenant member with me. Now, when it comes to that level of commitment, I'm just not there. Yeah, I'm just going to say I'm awestruck, but, pretty darn amazing. And so when you realize that this is our brother, and this is the guy that God loved, if it weren't for the warts, it would be, you just throw up your hands and say, I can't measure up to that. What am I going to do that could have any value to God compared to this guy?
Yeah.
Right. So why does he show Moshe, being attacked for being a good guy? Keeping it real. So we're not intimidated. So we can read the story of Abraham and say, that dude passed the test to be part of the covenant. I'll guarantee you, so can I.
Right.
Why it's that way. All the way through. And so not only does God place favorites, his affection for those that he loves is unfailing. It's genuine mercy, kindness, generosity forevermore. God is interesting in that he chooses to do everything through people, and not a single one of his jobs is paid. And yet, you're enriched more by working for Yahweh than the wealthiest people on the planet. I wouldn't trade what I have been given doing this job for free with the wealth of the 10 richest men combined. If you were to say, would you prefer to have the enlightenment, the emancipation, the empowerment, the insights, and just the genuine love and support of Yahweh, which we have to a large degree earned over these last 22 years and received, or the wealth of Elon Musk? And I'm going to tell you, my life is much more fulfilling, much more rewarding than is his. So Yahweh is exceedingly generous. And I think that everyone who has been part of this mission to inform his people prior to his return would say the same thing, that we are enriched. Leah was talking to a man down in Australia. I think it was today. It might have been yesterday. And he has been doing recorded readings of the books we have written. And Leah found out, listened to it. He just has he has the perfect voice for doing audiobooks. And she spoke to him. I don't know if it was on a phone call or they were communicating in some other way, but she says, it was almost a tearful response with the person that says, I'm kind of down here by myself doing this, and I love doing it, but to say you really want me to do this as a project so that all those people who would prefer to listen to these books to read them, and you want me to do this, and you're going to post what I'm doing on the site, was thrilled. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have the most generous Father in the world, and Yahweh being the Father of the covenant, and the most wonderful family in the world, and to be part of it and making a contribution to it is the most enriching thing a person can do.
It's true.
So there's a lot that Eythan is saying here just at the beginning. Of course, he says that name that you never read from a Jew. You know, every night and every morning I read virtually every article on the Jerusalem Post, and I read through the comments. And every time you read a comment, it's always Hashem this, Hashem that. You know, you notice here that in an inspired work, that it doesn't say Hashem. It says Yahweh.
Yahweh.
And Yahweh's name here is used on behalf of all generations throughout time for the entire household and family. With my mouth, he says, I will make known. I'm not going to express my faith. I have none. I will make known, revealing that I am familiar with and I understand. I acknowledge and I have embraced. No, not faith, not belief. I know that you are trustworthy and dependable, that you are honest and reliable, that you have a steadfast commitment to the truth. Pretty astute if you're going to say, okay, what distinguishes Yahweh from all others? Enduring love, steadfast devotion, favoritism,
all the above,
unfailing affection, genuine mercy, kindness, enormous, unparalleled generosity.
Indeed.
That his name is Yahweh, and that all of this is forever, unchanging, for the household and family of God. And so with my mouth, I will make known, Yada, revealing that I am familiar with and understand, that I am acknowledging that I have embraced the fact that Yahweh, you are trustworthy, you're dependable, you're honest, you're reliable, and you have a steadfast commitment to the truth. Man's only one statement into his song. Hasn't even mentioned Dowd yet. But he realizes something that is exceedingly important. As I go through, and we're more than a third of the way through now this edit pass to properly recognize Dowd's full contribution. And all the way through, you're constantly reminded that it's father and son. Without Yahweh, Dowd is nothing. With Dowd, Yahweh is extraordinary. God shines when he has the opportunity to work with someone as exceptional as Dowd. So here, the prophet is setting up the realization that while we're going to speak about how exceptional, how important Dowd is, he's important because of these attributes of Yahweh. And so now it's time for Yahweh to speak. He has been introduced, and that's, I think, a pretty fair introduction. I think Yahweh would say, I think you got it. That's a good explanation.
We'll start.
Yahweh now speaks through him. I have established, by the way, if you want God to speak through you, probably a pretty good idea to view God the same way that Eythan just did. I have established cutting through separation. The Berith covenant for the family and home. Through Ani Bakar, my chosen one, the person I prefer and have decided upon. So after that introduction, this is God's first statement. About playing favorites, about being generous, about enduring mercy, about eternal love, about doing all of this for the household and home, and that he is always reliable, trustworthy, and dependable. The first words that God says is, I have established the most important thing in the world to me, the most important thing in the universe to me. In fact, the universe only exists because of the importance of the bereth, the covenant for the family and home. I have established, cutting through separation, the bereth covenant for the family and home through Ani Bakar, my chosen one, the person I prefer and have decided upon. There is only one person that Yahweh has declared, I chose him. And then after God says, I chose him, he explains that the way that he makes decisions about who he wants to engage with is completely unlike the way that the most notorious people make decisions, that countries make decisions, or how people vote, or what people choose to believe in. God says, my criterion is completely different than yours. And he says, this is the guy that I chose. You chose Shaul. I chose Dowd. Compare them, and you will understand what I'm looking for. So who are you trying to impress? Men or God? I have sworn an oath, and I will affirm this promise 7 times over. Shabat, to Dowd, the beloved. Ebed Ani, my authorized agent and co-worker who serves on my behalf. Yikes. Can you imagine God saying, I swore an oath? He's God. Dowd, he's God. I swore an oath to this guy. I chose this guy to be the embodiment of my covenant family, to be the exemplar of my covenant family. In fact, more than that, because all 5 of the benefits of the covenant are provided through the first 4 Moed Mikre, all of which Dowd fulfilled in year 4000 Yah. God can literally say, I established the covenant through Dowd, because it is Dowd, God's chosen, his beloved son, that fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, Bokorim, and Shabuah. And it is through those 4 Moed Mikre that we become immortal, we become perfected. We're adopted into the covenant family. We are enriched, and we are empowered. Pretty strong statement. And so God says, not only did I choose him and decide upon him for the purpose of building and establishing my covenant family, but I swore an oath to him that I will affirm the promise 7 times over. Shabbat, how many Moed Mikre are there? 7. How many has and will Dowd fulfill? 7.
Participating in all. Anyway, yeah.
And so in fulfilling them, Dowd is Yahweh's authorized agent. Forevermore, as an ad olam, eternal and restoring witness, I will prepare and establish your offspring and that which you sow, Zerah, In addition, I will constitute a home for your throne and seat of honor on behalf of all generations throughout time. Pause now and contemplate the implications. One of the most difficult things that the religious have when they're trying to make sense of Yahweh's prophetic testimony is when Yahweh changes person. And what I mean by that is grammatically. God is speaking here in first person. He spoke of Dowd in third person. When he speaks of Dowd by name, when he speaks of Dowd being his chosen one, when he talks about Dowd being his authorized agent, he's speaking of Dowd in third person. Now, he's talking about Dowd doing a lot of things going forward, because Dowd wouldn't even begin to fulfill these things for 1,000 years after this was recorded. And some would be 3,000 years upon his return. But then Yahweh does something, and this is something that opened up our understanding of the most important prophecy, I think, in the entirety of the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms, which is 2 Samuel 7. And there, Yahweh opens by speaking through Nathan about Dowd. Then he speaks directly to Dowd, and then he speaks to us about Dowd. So he's speaking to Dowd in first person, second person, and third person, going through the prophetic review. Here, Yahweh introduced Dowd, speaking of him, and then he continues speaking to him. Dowd's life had ended 4 years before this was written. How can Yahweh speak to him unless he was there?
That's right.
I have sworn an oath, and I will affirm this promise 7 times over to Dowd, the beloved, my authorized agent, my co-worker who serves on my behalf forevermore. As an eternal witness to the restoring testimony, I will prepare and establish your offspring and that which you sow. In addition, I will construct a home for your throne and seat of honor on behalf of all generations throughout time. Pause now and contemplate the implications. Isn't just thrown out there as food for thought. Zerah means to sow, plant seeds, expecting new life, expecting them to be productive. If those seeds are properly planted, if those seeds are viable, if they are watered and nurtured, they will grow. They will produce so much more than you would think that potential little seed could possibly produce. And Zerah happens to be the root of Zeroah, Dowd's most important title. Overwhelmingly, Dowd's most important title. Means productive ram and sacrificial lamb. Zerah indeed. In addition, Yahweh is building a home for Dowd's throne. So when we see the new house of Yahweh, what the world will call for a brief moment a third temple, but none of us will who are part of his family, we're going to call it home. When Dowd and Yahweh build this magnificent new home, which will likely be comprised of light, at the center of that home, there will be a throne room. And the throne has a name on it. Dowd. God, who's the creator of the universe, isn't like the gods that man has made, where those gods sit on thrones. This is a God that says to the man he created and loved and cherished and worked with, I am creating a home for your throne. He didn't say, we're going to create 2 homes, one for your throne and one for mine. No, I'm creating a home for your throne. He didn't say, I want you to build me a fancy home. He said, no, I'm building it for you. The way it should be. It's the way it is. And so if Yahweh says, I chose him, I established my covenant through him, I worked with him, I made a promise to him, and I am establishing a home for his throne. Don't you think we ought to figure out why Yahweh is so enthralled, why he is so enthusiastic, why he is so committed to this man? I mean, it sure as heck isn't because he was a really nice shepherd at 8 years old there in Bethlehem. It's not because he took down a giant. It's not because he fell in love with really a charming man of great character. It's not that he was a great songwriter. It's not that he was a fabulous prophet. It's not that he was a heroic defender of his people, never having lost a battle. No, I think that the thing that changed Yahweh from saying, he is my son, he is the Messiah, he is my chosen one, to this level of praise, I'm building a throne for him forevermore. He is always going to be the leader of my people, is when Dowd volunteered to serve as the Passover lamb. And that's why Zerah has been introduced here, because that is what Dowd scattered his seeds, which can take root and grow and become productive children in the household of God. That's why he wants us to pause and consider the implications. The spiritual realm of the heavens knows and appreciates your wonderful accomplishments and marvelous contributions, Yahweh, and also your trustworthiness in the community of the set apart. So now this is the prophet recognizing that what Yahweh has just said is amazingly profound. And he is now telling us that we should know and appreciate what Yahweh has accomplished through Dowd. By contrast, who in the skies of the material realm can be equated or compared to Yahweh? Who is similar to or thinks like Yahweh among the gods? The answer is, of course, that the religious gods are all a bit characteristic. They're frightening. They're capricious. They're unreliable. They were created in man's image. They act a lot like men and women. The women, the goddesses, are like the worst of women, and the gods are the worst of men. They're constantly maneuvering for power and for sex and for mischief. They're horrible.
Yes.
And even the more modern versions, well, Allah was a terrorist by his own admission. Allah spends all of his time in hell, according to the Quran, tormenting those who don't capitulate. And the myth of Jesus Christ is nothing but plagiarism, taking everything that was said of Dowd and applying it to this myth, who turns out to be anti-Semitic. No, the gods of man are reprehensible. And Yahweh is so unique. I mean, he's unique in the sense that he happens to be the only actual God. He's the creator of the universe, the author of life, and that certainly that makes you distinct and would qualify as unique. But his whole persona is so different. He never brags. He's not arrogant. He doesn't want to be worshipped. What a difference. He doesn't want to be worshipped. Never asks you to bow down to him. Doesn't ask you to pray to him. Doesn't even ask you to believe him. He's not asking us to build houses for him. He wants to build houses for us. He doesn't want us to try to lift him up. He wants to lift us up. I mean, it's amazing. He is the opposite of the gods that man have created. And why is it we don't cherish that? Why is it we don't sing to that realization?
People are not taught this.
Yeah. The prophet then says something that I sense every day. God is inspiring and awesome. Inspiring. I were to isolate the thing that is most unique about the last 22 years is the inspired insights that we have derived from the Word of God. I think it would be safe to say that there are 1,000 insights, maybe 100 or 200 or more, very, very important, that are first disclosed as part of these books that were completely unheralded for thousands of years. The single most exciting thing about focusing on who Yahweh is and what he had to say and how he interacts with people is insights. And these insights are so profound, so life-altering, so liberating, so enlightening, that it is the greatest joy of being involved in this way. It is something that Eythan is declaring. God is inspiring. He's awesome, especially in the counsel and fellowship of the set-apart ones. That would be those who have chosen to be part of his covenant family. Tremendously great, while inspiring reverence and respect beyond all those around him. Yahweh, who just happens to be God, of the vast array of spiritual implements, who and what is comparable to your awesome power and extraordinary gifts, which are all around you, Yahweh, including your unwavering commitment to the truth. One of the greatest joys of the past 22 years is knowing that I don't have to run from anything. That right. No matter how challenging a statement appears to be, that if you just go in and you go head first into it, you look at each word, you set the meaning of that word face up on the table, you go word for word, and you analyze it in context, even the things you're going to say, oh my goodness, this is something we probably ought to pass and talk about something else. No, all of it is uplifting and inspiring and educational. You can be extremely confident because everything God has to say resonates as true. It's profoundly important. It's consistent. It gives a real sense of peace that it is like this. You have conveyed mashal, vivid parables, establishing an articulate leader over the raging devastation and presumptive arrogance of the sea. When its turbulent and surging waves rise up in deceit to craft delusions, you expose and stop them. Well, this is speaking of Yahweh. He's also speaking of Dowd. Dowd is the author of the Mashal, the Proverbs. He was better at conveying vivid parables and word pictures and more effective as a leader than anyone the planet has ever known. And he is the one who is returning on Yom Kippurim to wring devastation upon the presumptive arrogance of the Gentile nations represented by the sea. when they are at their most turbulent and their deceit is the most pervasive, Yahweh is returning with Dowd to expose and stop them. And even then, Yahweh will work through Dowd as opposed to alone. You humbled and crushed, rejecting and defeating that which is comparable to the reprehensible and deadly nature of the pretentious pride and stormy arrogance of the boisterous afflictor and his false god. Your empowered and fortified Yisra'el, protective shepherd and sacrificial lamb. It is noteworthy to appreciate that this boisterous afflictor with pretentious pride and stormy arrogance is singular. There are 3 candidates, because when God speaks of such individuals, he speaks of individuals who are harmful against his people, Israel. And so he's speaking of somebody who has had vast influence over a prolonged period of time, harming Israel and his people, whom Dowd, as the sacrificial lamb and protective shepherd, is going to overcome. So your candidates are Muhammad, is the last of them, who created Islam based upon a hatred of Jews. And he will ultimately marshal through his satanic religion. Hope that's not salty language. A flood of jihadists who will come into Israel. But they're going to be stopped before Dowd returns. So, can't be Muhammad. Next on the list, going back in time, would be Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva created rabbinic Judaism to maintain control of Jews during the period that another Jew, Paul, was luring them away through this new Christian religion. And so, to counter the false Messiah of Pauline Christianity, Rabbi Akiva created the false Messiah from which Israel gets its 6-starred flag and its national identity, Bar Kokhba, son of a star. By creating Judaism, he has caused more harm for Jews than anyone else, probably in the history of the world. And because of his false Messiah and his uprising against Rome, he caused the diaspora, which resulted in the Holocaust. So he's a prime candidate. And it's clear that Dowd will eliminate rabbinic Judaism upon his return. But that can't be this culprit. Why can't it be this culprit? Do you guys know? What's the context? The eroding and harmful nature of the sea. The remnant of those who are affected by Rabbi Akiva, who are harming Jews, are Jews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the goy.
So that leaves us with a single candidate, Paul. Well, Paul was a Jew, but his influence is not among Jews. He's perpetrated grave harm against Jews. There's no religion that has harmed and afflicted, demonized, and dehumanized Jews, subjugated them longer, are more egregiously than Christianity. It is the religion that God hates the most. It's why Yahweh calls Paul the plague of death, the father of lies, son of evil. There is no one in human history that God hates more than the author of the Christian New Testament, Paul.
Right.
He has an entire prophet who's only a prophet to condemn Paul. And throughout the Mizmor that Dowd has inspired, he calls out Shaul by name to condemn him. That was Paul's given name. And so this is a goyim, therefore uprising of the sea, religion that has traumatized his people. And he was more pretentious than anyone. He had this stormy arrogance. He was a boisterous afflicter. And boy, did he have a false god. And it's really interesting that the Iousu Christou, false god of Paul, was modeled after Paul.
It's true.
Just like Allah is the alter ego of Muhammad. That is who the Zoroa will take out. And it's really interesting because the only reason that Christianity exists is that they stole everything that was an accolade or achievement of Dowd, who is the Son of God, who is the Messiah, who is the Savior as the Zoroa sacrificial lamb. They stole it all from Dowd, who was the person that actually fulfilled Passover as the Passover lamb and was crucified by the Romans. The very celebration of Bikurim, they attribute Christians, rob from Dowd and attribute to their mythical misnomer, who is nothing more than a plagiarized robbery of Dowd. And so the real article, the actual Messiah, the actual Passover lamb, the actual Son of God, is going to destroy the fake. That's what this says, and it'll be the great achievement. And it's why Dowd is introduced here as the Zoroa. The shepherd is going to come to protect his people from that raging sea of Christianity. And as the actual Passover lamb, he's going to provide salvation for his people by ridding the world of the pretentious pride and stormy arrogance, the deadly nature of the Christian faith. We're at 89:10. It says, it ends by saying, you isolate and separate your adversaries. The spiritual realm of the heavens is yours, the material realm of the world, and that which is in it is also yours. You laid the foundation for them. You created them. Now, this is important because Yahweh is in a different position than, well, it sounds pretty stupid, but okay, he's in a different position than you and I. And so,
sure.
If Yahweh wants Dowd upon his return to eliminate all religion and its hosts, all politics and its hosts, all conspiracy and the hosts of conspiracy, those who promote it. Mm-hmm. If we did that, we would be murderous. We have no right to do it because we did not create those lives. Therefore, we have no right to shortchange them. All we can do is expose them and condemn them with our words. Yah was in a different position. He gave them life, and so he can end it and still be fair.
Right.
And he's going to. And that's what this says. It's your world. And heaven is your home. You can have in heaven whoever you want and exclude whoever you want. And when you return, you can support Dowd in eliminating all of those people who were in religious institutions and political institutions that were hostile to your people. Making it clear that death, this is what's going to happen, but that we should not take this upon ourselves. We can do what Eythan did, which is to use our words. It's God who will empower Dowd with this result, and he will be ultimately fair, giving everyone what they deserve, and even those lives that he ends at that moment. The lives that they had up to that moment was a gift. They would not have had them were not for Yahweh. He's not taking anything from them. He gave them an opportunity, and they bungled it. The spiritual realm of the heavens is yours, the material realm of the world, and all that is in it is yours. You laid the foundations for them. You created them. The north, the place where treasure is taken and hidden, and the south, the right side, you have created them. Tabor, the broken and shattered, and Shimon, the banned and exterminated, shout for joy in your name. Boy, Israel, by the time that Yah returns, will be battered. God's people, look at the United Nations and how they're trying to ban them. Look how Muslims are trying to exterminate them. And yet, recognizing that Yahweh is coming back to protect his people, to liberate his people, to reconcile his relationship with his family, those who have been battered and bruised are going to shout for joy. Beside you and on your behalf, the Zerah, the protective shepherd and sacrificial lamb with tremendous power and courage, character and awesome ability. Yaborah will be your strong hand, raised up high at your right side. Who has he been talking about? Only one name has been mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Dowd. Dowd is the protective shepherd. He is the sacrificial lamb. And with tremendous power, courage, character, awesome ability. Gabora. Gabora is the feminine of Gabor. Dowd is the poster child for Gabor. Courageous, capable, competent, confident. A man who is not afraid to fight for what's right. And what Gabora means is that he's able to do this because of the nature of his soul, which is feminine in Hebrew, and the empowerment that the Ruach Kodesh, set-apart spirit, which is also feminine in Hebrew, provides. And so we're being told that the Zerah is powerful and has awesome ability because the Zerah is really Dowd's soul. Nephesh, feminine. And it's Dowd's soul that is returning to fulfill the first four Mikra, beginning with Passover. Being correct and vindicating regarding executing good judgment and justly resolving disputes serve as the foundation of your throne. God is speaking of the one person that he built a throne for. Or actually, it's the prophet speaking of Yahweh, but clearly regarding Dowd.
Right.
And when we talk about the work of the Zerah, which is and it's feminization, which means we're dealing with Dowd's soul, nephesh, feminine in Hebrew, and enabled through the Ruach Kodesh, set apart spirit, again feminine in Hebrew. When God speaks of that, and then says that it's all in conjunction with tsedeq, mishpat, he's telling us that vindication, acquittal, salvation comes by us making a proper decision, an informed and rational conclusion, exercising good judgment about these very means to resolve disputes, which are achieved through the fulfillment of the Moed Mikre. A loving relationship and genuine mercy, along with steadfast commitment to the truth, encounter those who enter your presence. And in this case, as in so many others, you can capitalize the you and say you're speaking of Yahweh. You can lowercase the you and recognize you're speaking of the Zeroah, Dowd. And in actuality, it doesn't make any difference. You know why?
She's like God.
They're father and son. Same place.
Yeah.
Achieving the same thing. That house isn't going to be for one soul. Yahweh's going to live there with his son. And so are we. Delighted to show the way because blessed, Asheri. Asheri is actually the first word that Dowd would write as a prophet. It's the first word that I translated when I became interested in what the prophets had to say. It speaks of forming a relationship, showing the benefits of that relationship, being blessed by the relationship, getting the most out of life along the proper path. Delighted to show the way because blessed, Asheri, are the people who are aware of and acknowledge Towrah, who walk with the light of your presence, Yahweh. 89:15. I think we spent an entire program on 89:15.
We did.
And some might say, well, it was selfish because, well, I'm telling you, folks, we are the living embodiment of Towrah. We are the prophetic fulfillment of this prophecy, and to bring it to your attention, it deserved a show. But the very fact is, it's not self-indulgent. Yahweh would not have spoken about the role that those who are the living embodiment of Towrah, Dowd's heralds, would play in communicating this particular message to God's people before they return on Yom Kippurim to restore the relationship, unless he wanted for his people to know that he had predicted this 3,000 years ago. And that he made this commitment 3,000 years ago because he wanted his people to listen. So that is why he's saying that the very first word that we translated 22 years ago, Asher, to show the way, are the people who are aware of and acknowledge Towrah. 22 years ago, this mission began on a Towrah when Yahweh first reached out and said, I want you to do this. And for 22 years, that's what we have done. We walk with the light that Yahweh has provided through his prophets, through his Torah, into the very presence of our God. It's the most exciting, the most humbling, the most energizing, and the most debilitating statements you could possibly have. All of those things together. And inspiring and uplifting because God chose to do this through us for the benefit of his people. By doing it, we're not only fulfilling a prophecy, we're making our Father proud, pleased. But also, it's hard to measure up. You know, there's no matter of devotion that measures up to the awesome responsibility of this.
So
and
true.
So it's one of the things you say, yeah, I really wish you hadn't said it. because then anything we do is beneficial, and whatever we fail to do is immaterial. You can just look at the family's contribution to the message of Yada Yah, and everything is favorable, and anything we accomplish is good because we're not responsible in this major way. But when you're given this degree of responsibility, then a lot is expected. And so it is frightening. Frightening is not the right term, but it is humbling.
Intimidating.
Intimidating, yes, all those things in that regard. But we have to recognize that Yahweh didn't say this for us.
Right.
He said it for you, all of you out there who are listening, because he wants you to listen, because he wants you to learn, because he wants you to approach him. He wants you to know his name, to love his name, to recognize that he is loving and merciful and caring, and steadfast and reliable, and that he chose to work through Dowd in all of these remarkable ways. And he wants a herald in the last days to broadcast this message based upon the purpose of Towrah, walking in the light of his words to the very presence of God. In your name they rejoice every day, and I'm delighted that it's plural because it is a family. We do work together. And this would be impossible without many of us working together to serve Yahweh's people. In your name, they rejoice every day. And in your justice and vindication, by being right, they are lifted on high. Mentioned that we're going through the 30 books of Yada Yah, and they're all available, yadayah.com. Every book you can read the entirety free. It's a marvelous bookshelf as you open yadayah.com. Every book there, as I say, is in its entirety free. You can also buy every book in paperback and hardback without royalty from Amazon, and for pennies by the Kindle versions of these books as well. Or you can listen to these programs as they're posted throughout the internet, and our community is presented also on the site. And we do, in fact, lift up Yahweh's name every day. And we do strive to be right. The very fact that we're rewriting these books is we learned more about Dowd than we knew previously. And so we needed to go back and make certain that that was conveyed right from the beginning. Being right matters.
Yes.
And it is important to Yahweh, and it's therefore important to us. Indeed, the adornment and the appearance of their empowerment and fortification is yours. Yeah, Yahweh's really clear on Yasha'yah 11. He's got 7 spirits making the Choter work, creating this Nesh sign. He talked about the set-apart spirit came upon Dowd the moment that he was anointed. Well, Dowd obviously was more capable than I must be because, he threw the whole McGillicuddy at me. So
no chance you can fail.
Yeah, I don't have much to work with here. We don't have much time. So here we go.
Booster shots.
Yeah, booster shot. Seven spirits. By your acceptance and approval, our brilliant illuminating horn is lifted up. Yeah. The beautiful horn, Koran, is the horn that was found in the dress rehearsal of Passover when Abraham and Yitzhak went there, and it was the Koran that Yahweh used to demonstrate that he would provide the lamb, and he did through his son, And it is the Koren that forms that shofar horn that we blow to herald the purpose and meaning, the mission of Towrah. And Koren means to radiate light, which is why God says that we walk with the light into his presence. For our deliverance and protection are from Yahweh. Accordingly, the Qadowsh, set apart one of Yisra'el, is our king. Isn't this also reassuring? That Yahweh is the source of deliverance and protection. Why? Because Yahweh works through the Qadowsh, set apart one of Yisra'el, who happens to be our king, who is the eternal king of Yisra'el, God's
Dowd.
son, the Messiah, Dowd. And it is Dowd through whom Yahweh provides, again, deliverance and protection. Therefore, in relation to this, logically, you spoke in a revelation to your Bakarim, chosen and tested ones, saying, I have acquitted and bestowed assistance, supplying what is needed on behalf of the Gabor, the most courageous and capable man. I have raised up and exalted the Bashar, chosen one from the people. 89:19. So God's going on saying, I communicated this to you through a prophetic revelation. And that in that revelation, I said that there would be those who are chosen and who are tested, who are affirmed, who are validated, who will say that they have acquitted and bestowed what is needed for you to have an appreciation of the Gabor, the courageous and capable man of God, Dowd. And Yahweh is also stating that he provided all of this to Dowd, but the fact is, Bakarim, chosen and tested ones, is plural. And Gabor is singular. So this is God employing a number of people, working through them to make this pronouncement on behalf of Dowd as the Gabor.
Makes sense.
Again, you are listening to the fulfillment of that prophecy. Nowhere else in the world, not for 3,000 years, has anyone shared any of these insights. It has not been said in 3,000 years until now that Dowd is the Messiah, that Dowd is the Son of God, that Dowd is the returning King of Kings, that Dowd is the chosen one, that Dowd is the Saroah, Passover lamb, that Dowd is the one through whom Yahweh fulfilled each of the 7 Moed Mikra, and that the very purpose of Towrah is to herald his return with his Father on the day of reconciliations. All of that is stated here and nowhere else. The recognition that Dowd is the Gabor, that when Yahweh made that great prophecy through Yasha'yah and Yasha'yah 9, Isaiah 9, and spoke of the Gabor and gave Dowd's name as the child who was born, the son who was given, would advance the work of Almighty God. He was speaking of Dowd. This is the only place that celebrates Dowd's most important title, which isn't even Messiah. It isn't even Malachia King. It isn't even Son of God. It isn't even firstborn. It isn't even the chosen one. Dowd's most important title is Zeruah, protective shepherd and sacrificial lamb. I have raised up and exalted the Bashar, chosen one from among the people. I discovered and then made known, encountered and experienced and exposed Dowd, my co-worker, out of Shimon Kodesh, my set-apart oil. I have Mashiach. I have anointed him so that to show the way to the benefits of the relationship, Asher, my hand and influence, Yadani, will be established and steadfast, authenticated and unwavering, Kun, with you. In addition, and beyond this, Ani Zeroah, my protective shepherd, my strong arm, sacrificial lamb, will empower and embolden you, strengthening you, while enabling your growth. Oh, we're just a third of the way through, and yet it's already the most important song ever written. In Dowd's song, this beginning of the 89th Mizmor, Yahweh has already acknowledged his son as Dowd, the beloved, 2 times. He has called him the Bashar Ani, my chosen one, 2 times. He has referred to his son as my co-worker, Ibed Ani, 2 times. He referred to him as a restoring and eternal witness, Ad Olam, 2 times. He called him an articulate leader, Mashal, once. He referred to him as his right hand, Yamen, once. Azad Yad, a strong hand, once. Geburah, the soul's feminine manifestation of tremendously empowered, inspired, courageous, with outstanding character and awesome ability, twice. Qadowsh, the set-apart one of Yisra'el, once. The Gabor, God's most courageous and capable man, once. Mashach, his anointed, once. Lots of ones, lots of twos. There was 1 4. Zeroah, the protective shepherd and sacrificial lamb. It is the most important of Dowd's titles, and it's the one that no one, apart from what we're doing here, acclaims. Therefore, in relation to this, logically, you spoke in a revelation to your Bakurim, chosen and tested ones, saying, I have acquitted and bestowed assistance, supplying what is needed on behalf of the Gabor, most courageous and capable man. I have raised up and exalted the Bashar, the chosen one from the people. I discovered and then made known, encountered, experienced, and exposed Dowd, my co-worker. And then out of my Shimon Kodesh Ani, set apart oil, I have Mashach anointed him, so that to show the way to the benefits of the relationship, Asher, my hand and influence, Yad Ani, will be established and steadfast, authenticated, unwavering, Kun, with you. Dowd isn't, or Yahweh isn't saying these things to bolster Dowd. Dowd already knows exactly what the relationship is with Yahweh. Numero uno. The first one. He's saying it for us. Yahweh did all of this stuff through Dowd, not for Dowd, but for you and me. All of it for you. Addition, Ani, my protection, strong arm and sacrificial life will empower and embolden you, strengthening you, while enabling your growth. All is our Savior. It was the Son of God, the Messiah, the chosen one, the firstborn, the King of Kings, who came back a second time to fulfill the first four Mikre, Pesach, Matzah, Bakut, Shabuah, in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. He was the Passover lamb. It was his soul that was burdened with our guilt that he took with him into Sheol, hell, and deposited it there, never to be seen again, making us appear perfect in God's eyes after opening Passover's door to God's home and life eternal. And then it was Dowd, who, as Yahweh's firstborn, celebrated Bakurim for children, showing us the way home, proving what he had achieved, inviting us to follow him, empowering and emboldening us with the fulfillment of Shabuah, the promise of 7, as God and working together strengthen us while enabling our growth. Mizmor 89, 1 through 21.
Powerful.
That it is powerful. Yes, and from this we move forward because it's hard to imagine, but it does get better. This is Dowd's song. This is the most powerful prophecy in the entire Towrah and Prophets. This is the key that unlocks heaven's door. It is the means that Yahweh offered for us to fully appreciate the nature of the covenant and then to avail ourselves of the covenant's benefits. Yes, everyone knows that Yahweh chose to work with Moshe, the great liberator, to free his people from Yisra'el, Egypt. But they do not know that he chose to work with his beloved son, Dowd, to fulfill the most important 4 days in human history, Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim, and Shabuah, in year 4000 Yah. And more than any, that is what this song is about.
Right.
Well, we've gone way up past our talk radio is going to cut us off any moment now. I could not imagine the program before we reach this point, and
Right.
I look forward to continuing next week. But for all who are listening, may I encourage you to go to YadaYah.com, pull first volume of Coming Home. It's towards the right side of the bookshelf, down off the shelf. We are sharing from volume 1. This happens to be on where we stopped this evening on page 471 of volume 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage you to read what we shared this evening, and even prepare yourself for next week by reading what follows. The written word is a far more effective and powerful communicator than the oral presentation that we are providing. It's all there for you for free. You have a chance to validate, corroborate all of the translations. Every word in Hebrew is presented for you to do that very thing. Take your time, study it, make the connections to understand it. It is all there for you, and there is no more important message for God's people, Yisra'el and Yehudem, than the realization that your Savior and your Messiah is none other than David. Well, thank you for listening. Happy Shabbat to one and all, and we look forward to being with you this time. Being banned again for salty language, but I've always thought of salt as a good thing. It adds flavor, and it preserves something that is nutritious. So if we're a bit salty, and I'm a captain, I've been called an old salt. I wouldn't make an apology wouldn't make an apology for any of that. And I can tell you that Yahowah's language is a bit salty as well. So I think it's a compliment. The search box of the thought police obviously don't like it, but they are convinced that hate is a terrible thing when Yahowah sees it as a virtue. It is imperative that we learn what and how to hate if we're to show mercy to those who are victims of so many foolish ideas. So, again, thank you for listening. We look forward to being with you next week, as salty as ever.
Shabbat shalom.